Welcome to Emergency Management Orientation. The objective of this course is to familiarize you with how hospitals prepare for, respond to, and manage emergencies. Common planning techniques and the basics of the Hospital Incident Command System, or HICS, will be discussed. It is important to understand that this course is just the beginning of emergency management training. You are encouraged to become familiar with your hospital's emergency management program and learn what your hospital expects of you during an emergency. Many different types of events, including natural disasters, environmental incidents, and sudden increases in demand for services, can adversely affect a hospital's ability to provide patient care. Whatever their cause or level of impact, emergencies can and should be managed consistently with a process that anticipates likely events and a system that provides the leadership necessary to effectively manage the incident. For the purposes of this course, an emergency is defined as a sudden onset event that may disrupt the hospital's function, inhibit its ability to provide care, or cause potential harm to patients, staff, and visitors. It is this suddenness that requires an emergency response. When an emergency occurs, actions must be taken to establish an incident management structure using the Hospital Incident Command System, minimize the disruption, reduce danger to occupants, and ensure that appropriate steps are taken to maintain patient care. If these measures are insufficient, poorly organized, if there is not enough time to initiate them, or if the magnitude of the event greatly exceeds hospital resources and response capabilities, then the emergency may overwhelm the hospital. Emergency preparedness is how hospitals get ready to respond. This includes completing a hazard assessment, implementing risk reduction measures, and performing drills and exercises prior to an emergency. These steps improve the hospital's ability to absorb the impact of the event and respond accordingly. Preparedness reduces the likelihood that emergencies will turn into disasters. Preparing for emergencies begins by assessing the various risks the hospital faces. This assessment anticipates high likelihood hazards by conducting a formal Hazard Vulnerability Analysis, or HVA. This analysis helps hospital leaders identify what hazards exist, their likelihood of occurrence, their potential impact, and how prepared the hospital is to respond and manage them. With this data, planning and training can be prioritized for the most likely hazards. For instance, the HVA may point out for a hospital in Kansas that there is a high likelihood of tornadoes in their area, or a hospital in California would identify the risk of earthquakes. It only makes sense that hospitals in these areas spend more resources on preparing for those hazards. After analyzing hazards, planning is conducted. Hospitals usually develop specific plans for expected emergencies. While this is generally a worthwhile process, it's unrealistic to expect that hospitals can plan for every possible emergency or contingency. There are simply too many variables and not enough time or resources to reasonably address them all. To combat the unpredictability of emergencies, hospitals should focus their readiness activities on the predictable features that most disasters share, regardless of their origin. These features include issues related to communications, resources and assets, safety and security, staff responsibilities, utilities management, and patient clinical and support activities. Hospital emergency planning usually falls into one of the following categories: all hazards planning, incident-specific planning for high-likelihood events, and individual department plans. An all-hazards plan describes how the healthcare facility will operate, plan, manage, and respond to incident events regardless of cause or areas affected. All hazard and incident-specific planning are usually encompassed in a facility-wide plan called an Emergency Operations Plan, or EOP. The Emergency Operations Plan is the blueprint that supports all of the needs and activities of hospital staff preparing for and responding to an emergency event. The plan utilizes the incident command system to manage all of the necessary vital activities so staff can perform their job in a safe, efficient, and productive manner. The EOP should be viewed as the essential link between what needs to be done and how to get it done. As a result, there should never be a barrier to activating the emergency operations plan, and staff should be encouraged to activate early and often. By activating the EOP in the earliest stages of an event, hospital leadership are afforded the time necessary to shift their focus and priorities temporarily away from everyday business to the problem at hand. In most cases, an EOP activation does not require any additional staff to be called in or commitment of resources beyond assigning one person to take charge, the incident commander. An emergency operations plan should have its activation tiered based on the impact the event is having or is likely to have. Activating in this manner ensures that resources, manpower, and material are appropriately aligned with anticipated need. The number of tiers or levels of plan activation may vary based on the size of the hospital and number of yearly emergency department visits. A smaller facility may use 2 levels of activation while a larger hospital may use 4. Regardless of the approach used, tiered activation is preferable to the traditional on-off switch for activating the EOP, which commonly wastes resources and discourages plan use. Hospitals should also have incident-specific plans, commonly called critical event annexes. These detail special procedures for those high-likelihood events identified during the hazard vulnerability analysis. For example, since fires, power failures, hazardous materials incidents, and disease outbreaks typically present great vulnerability to a hospital, there should be specific plans and procedures for managing the unique requirements of those types of emergencies. Finally, a hospital should have individual department plans, which are commonly called Department Emergency Operations Plans. These plans, which are often one page, describe briefly what each department's role and responsibilities are during a crisis and what employees are expected to do during the response. Because the focused information is in a condensed format that allows it to be clearly posted in each department, there is no need to memorize the plan. You simply proceed to the posted document and review it as needed. Regardless of how a specific hospital conducts emergency planning, many times the most effective aspect of planning is the collaborative process of developing the plan. In other words, simply instituting the mindset of preparedness gets hospitals more ready for emergencies. A major part of enhancing preparedness is implementing a system for emergency management. This system should be relied upon in both emergent and non-emergent incidents and events. The management system should be in a standard format for response that is not only effective, but also immediately recognizable to others from responding agencies. Hospitals manage emergencies and unusual events using a process called the Incident Command System, or ICS, which is a proven crisis management tool that is widely used by most response organizations. A healthcare-specific version based on the principles of ICS was developed in the 1980s and has become the national standard for healthcare emergency management. Through its evolution and several revisions, the Hospital Incident Command System, or HICS, is not only highly applicable to hospitals, but also to other healthcare facilities and organizations. HICS is a comprehensive all-hazards incident management strategy whose modular design and flexibility lends itself to managing a variety of incidents or events, ranging from annual influenza vaccination programs, severe weather alerts, and multiple trauma notifications to natural disasters. HICS is not meant to replace the everyday business organization of the hospital. Rather, HICS enhances the ability and capacity of hospitals to optimally function during an incident that is dependent on a number of factors, including effective coordination with other responding agencies, community partners, and suppliers. By implementing HICS, hospitals are able to speak the same language as their response partners and communicate and coordinate more effectively. Other HICS supporting documents can be found at the DQE On Demand online library. HICS works by applying basic management principles to crisis events in a standardized and methodical manner. It relies on a predictable chain of command with accountability for each position and team function. HICS uses a standardized and scalable incident management system that addresses planning and response needs of any size hospital or healthcare facility. Finally, HICS manages by objectives in which the problem encountered is evaluated, a plan to remedy the problem is identified and implemented, the necessary resources are assigned, and actions are taken. When an emergency event is recognized and a response is initiated or imminent, a critical action is the activation of command. Under the Incident Command System, the person in charge of the entire response is called the Incident Commander, or IC. The IC gathers information about the incident, decides the incident response objectives, and matches resources to accomplish those objectives. For smaller incidents, the IC can command from the incident site. For larger incidents, leadership and direction of the incident response takes place in the hospital command center, which is in a designated and secured location. The Hospital Incident Command System assigns staff based on specific functions or objectives. Every situation is unique, so the organization is built differently to manage each event. However, the overall organization is standardized and predictable. The IC groups activities into 4 major functions that are common to all response, called sections. These sections include operations, planning, logistics, and finance and administration. Initially, the incident commander is responsible for leading all activities. As the incident demands grow, they drive larger resource needs and more response actions, so the IC will delegate responsibilities to section chiefs who will coordinate activities that fall into their assigned function. The operations section is responsible for all activities relating to the tactical objectives identified by the IC. This includes maintaining care and services for existing patients, receiving new patients, operating support areas such as radiology and pharmacy, hazmat and security functions, maintenance of the overall facility operations, and business continuity. The planning section gathers, tracks, evaluates, and disseminates incident information and intelligence to the incident commander. This section looks ahead to changing conditions, anticipates personnel and material resource needs, is responsible for preparing status reports, and developing the Incident Action Plan, or IAP. The logistics section is responsible for acquiring all needed resources to help meet the demands associated with an emergency or disaster. In addition, this section supports all communication needs, information technology requirements, and food services for staff. The logistics section also coordinates the resource needs for employee health and well-being, transportation, and credentialing. The finance and administration section tracks all timekeeping, costs, and expenses dedicated to the event. While the ICS gives the management structure to the overall response, each assigned position in the ICS structure requires clearly defined roles and responsibilities. These roles and responsibilities are detailed in job action sheets for each hospital incident management team position. These sheets were prepared in advance by the California Emergency Medical Services Authority and should be distributed to staff upon assignment to ensure that critical tasks are not overlooked. Using these job action sheets help focus individuals on the specific task at hand, especially during stressful situations, and aids in orienting individuals assigned to unfamiliar roles. The job action sheets also represent excellent planning tools that hospitals can review and customize based upon their normal operational responsibilities and staffing levels. When an emergency occurs, there are a few basic things that happen. Someone discovers or identifies the emergency. Ideally, that person notifies the appropriate internal authorities that activate the hospital's emergency operations plan to the level corresponding to the anticipated impact of the event. Some type of announcement or alarm is broadcasted, incident command is established, and then the actual response is begun. An emergency response finishes with recovery activities and some form of after-action evaluation. Because employees may be asked to assume different roles and responsibilities during the response, flexibility and cooperation are very important. It is imperative that site-specific program training occurs and that it details the specific responsibilities staff will have during each stage of emergency response. Staff needs to understand how to recognize existing or impending circumstances, anticipate threats, and act on emergency notifications that may impact the hospital's ability to provide care. When predetermined plan activation levels are met, such as prolonged emergency department wait times or sudden surge in the number of arriving patients, staff need specific and simple ways to notify the proper authorities and, in some cases, activate alarms. A clear staff notification policy is also paramount to safe response. Alarm broadcasts should be in clear language, avoiding abbreviations, acronyms, or color code designations, and provide the proper level of information. Some incidents may require notification only in the immediate area, while larger emergencies may necessitate facility-wide information over the public address speaker system. An example of a good PA announcement might sound like this. Attention, attention, an emergency decontamination operation has been activated in the emergency department. All decon team members report to the assembly point in the ambulance bay. In some cases, the announcement will be made by telephone, pager, computer, or by a supervisor. When the emergency is over, an all-clear announcement will be made in a similar way. Communication policies during incidents are very critical. In almost every post-event or after-action review, ineffective communication is mentioned as an issue. The appropriate level and amount of communication is important. Systems can be quickly overwhelmed when everyone is trying to communicate at the same time. Your hospital's emergency operations plan should include site-specific procedures for informing staff of what is going on. Some incidents may require off-duty staff to be called back to the hospital to provide assistance. The procedure for doing this should be very clear and understood by all staff that may be called in. Activating a call center with recorded information and having clear calling trees or paging policies is critical. If off-duty personnel learn about an emergency at the hospital or in the community, they should call the hospital's emergency hotline or employee information line for recorded information and instructions if available. Some hospitals post information on an internet website as well, while others broadcast instructions typically during inclement weather over social media channels, local radio, and/or television stations. Staff may also need to make arrangements to come to work if requested. This could include arranging for pet, child, or adult dependent care, or adjusting personal schedules to ensure availability. If not requested to come in immediately, employees should report as scheduled for their next regular shift. If an employee is unable to come to work as scheduled, they must contact their supervisor for instructions. Employees should not respond to the scene of an emergency in the community unless they are part of the planned, organized response, for example, if you are a volunteer firefighter or EMT. Well-intentioned people who respond to emergencies create additional difficulties for emergency responders and sometimes are injured or killed. It is very important that staff follows directions closely in an emergency and do not leave their departments or assignments to go off or act on their own. When the incident commander anticipates that extra staff will be needed to help, for example, to move patients around the hospital, serve meals, or direct traffic, the logistics section chief will set up a labor pool and credentialing unit. The labor pool usually sets up in a large open area such as the cafeteria, where staff gathers and waits for an assignment. The person in charge, called the labor pool unit leader, will keep track of the various employees, their schedules, and their skills, and will assign them to report for work at specific locations or to specific supervisors as needed. During an incident, supply distribution often becomes an issue. If demand exceeds the supply, special action needs to be taken. This is generally the responsibility of the logistics section, which is responsible for getting personnel the equipment and materials needed. Staff should communicate resource needs to their supervisor or unit leader, who will follow the chain of command to get supplies. In the wake of recent disasters, personal emergency preparedness has surfaced as a very important issue. In times of crisis, many staff members will respond heroically, but only after they confirm that their own families and property are safe. Even when they do respond, if personal issues are on their minds, they will be less effective. Staff should be encouraged to review available materials to help them prepare their homes and families for emergencies. Websites such as ready.gov and redcross.org provide useful information. Also, the community emergency management offices and fire departments can often provide materials to help staff prepare on a personal level. This course was designed as an orientation to hospital incident management. Emergencies were defined as events that require response actions to prevent or minimize loss of life or damage to property or the environment. The detailed organizational structure known as ICS was also briefly mentioned. The adaptation of ICS to hospitals, known as the Hospital Incident Command System or HICS, was introduced. The 5 major functions of ICS, command, operations, planning, logistics, and finance and administration, help organize response based on common functions. The basics of site-specific planning and training were covered in detail. Finally, the importance of personal preparedness was reviewed. This orientation is just the beginning toward better incident management at your hospital.